Hi, Despina. I'm so sorry to disturb. We can't hear you
Thank you so much
suddenly.
for letting me know.
Yeah,
Hello,
no problem.
everybody. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Despina Sanudu. I'm a full professor at the Medical School of the University of Athens. My background is in genetics and genomics, and my PhD was at the University of Cambridge. I was then an instructor at the Harvard Medical School, and I'm board certified in clinical molecular diagnostics. Since then, I have acquired over the years as in the academic setting considerable experience in writing manuscripts, writing grants, serving as a reviewer, serving as an editorial board member, as an associate editor, and with all this experience, I would like to share with you today the top 10 tips for successful manuscript submission. I would like to thank Anago and Karger for giving me the opportunity to present for the Royal Society of Medicine. This is a disclaimer. And I would like to encourage all of you to post any questions you may have in the Q&A box that this platform offers, and I'll be more than happy to discuss all of them at the end of the session. So our agenda today, the topics we will be going through, first of all, how you determine the right type of manuscript for your research. How do you assign authorships and contributorships? How do you understand copyright and licensing issues? Some basic information, important information in order to navigate yourself in that setting. We will discuss the disclosure of conflicts of interest, the importance of avoiding at all costs publication misconduct, how to choose the right journal for your research, the possibility of sending pre-submission inquiries, how you can ensure that you adhere to author guidelines for the journal you've chosen, understanding submission requirements, and then familiarizing yourself with the online submission process and system. Let's start with an overview of the academic publishing landscape. Publishing is a critical component not only of a researcher's career, it's an integral component in their career, but it's also very important for the universities, all different universities and research institutes. It's a way to demonstrate the productivity of their researchers, the focus of their work, their impact in science. It's important for funders because this way they can assess how the funds they provide are being used, the quality and quantity and impact of the work that comes out of the funded projects. And also it's a way for them to showcase the importance and impact of their funding to the world. It's important, of course, for libraries. They're based, all their activity is based around publications. For publishers who are there to support and create the opportunities and the setting for all these manuscripts to become uh, available to the scientific community. They're very important for policymakers throughout the process of generating policies, and of course for the medical community, because this is how they stay up to date. They share, not only share their discoveries, but they stay up to date, they work together, they exchange views, they agree or disagree. This is how they um, make guidelines public, and they share them with the world. So for all these different groups of people, for all these different entities, publishing is an integral component of their day-to-day life and existence in many instances. So why is it so important to publish research, to publish the findings of your work? For many different reasons, among which is the first and obvious, the contribution to science, to research. Adding your findings to this big puzzle that we're trying to solve, to understand better biological functions, to decipher pathogenetic mechanisms, to find cure for so many different diseases. Unless we make our results publicly available, unless the world knows about them, the scientific community knows about them, the pharmaceutical companies know about them, there's no way to actually use them and translate them to clinical practice. Then there are the personal benefits, personal development, and career progression. We are assessed based on our publications. It's a very clear indication of our productivity, the quality of our work, the quantity of our work. Um, it's fruit of our collaborations, of our networking, the outcome of any funding we have obtained. Publications are also a forum for discussion, scientific discussions, and constructive criticism. It's important to show your data, express your opinions, your hypotheses, your ideas, and get into the discussion with the reviewers and later on with the wider scientific community as to how to make the most of this information and to expand based on your findings. And of course, ultimately, our scientific work contributes to clinical and public health. No matter how basic or how clinical the research is, in the biomedical community, the final goal, the final outcome, desirable outcome, is to help the patient, to help the public. And only through publishing your work, this can actually be achieved. So let's start with the top 10 tips for how to have an impactful publication. First of all, once you have completed your work, your research work, it's important to identify the right type of manuscript to present your work to the scientific community. And there are many different types of articles. An overview is presented in this slide. So in those cases where you have extremely strong evidence, such as in the case of clinical trials, systematic reviews, and meta-analysis, you're looking at a specific type of specific types of manuscripts. So there are manuscripts that are designed to focus on the presentation of clinical trials. There's manuscripts for meta-analysis, for systematic reviews, and you prepare them based on the guidelines for each one of those types. In those cases where you have strong evidence, you're usually looking into preparing an original research article, a brief communication depending on the amount of work that you have available, a letter to the editor, or technical reports. Again, it depends on the type of data that you have generated, the amount of data you have generated, the novelty, and how fast you want to see it published, and how much more you anticipate or you don't anticipate to work on this. So whether you consider it analyzed in depth or you consider that this is a very important early finding, but very important and merits publication right away. But in all the instances that we're seeing here in the middle column, we're talking about strong evidence. And then we have those types of manuscript that deal with weak evidence. These are usually case reports, the how I do it type of articles, commentaries, or opinion articles. And how do you go about structuring your manuscript once you have decided on the type that suits your data best? So first you decide on the type, and then you go on to prepare the different parts of the manuscript. So independently of the type of manuscript that you choose, pretty much all manuscripts will have a title, an abstract, an introduction. Then methodology and results depends on the type of manuscript that you've chosen, a discussion, conclusion, and bibliography. These are the main sections that pretty much every article has. This is not necessarily the order that we go about preparing them. And what do I mean by that? Usually, when we start writing a manuscript, we start with a methodology. This is the most straightforward part of the manuscript. We know what methods we've used, what we've done, what specimens, for example, we've used, what conditions we've used, etc. This is a pretty straightforward part to prepare. So this gets out of the way first. Then we start describing the results. We prepare figures. In many instances, you will find scientists who believe that figures should be the first thing that one prepares in a manuscript, and then you build your manuscript around them. So this is the results section, where you will have your figures and your tables, if you deem appropriate, supplementary material, and a description of all the different groups of findings. Keep in mind that the order you present your results does not necessarily have to be identical to the order you performed the experiments, the chronological order. You can change the order so as to facilitate the reader to understand, to have a better flow in the manuscript and facilitate the reader to understand where you started from and why you proceeded with the different steps to get to your final results and main conclusions. So the order of the results is up to you. Most of the time, then one goes on to write the introduction, because now you know where your manuscript will be focusing on, the key points that you want to make, and then your introduction can be prepared accordingly in a fashion so that it provides all necessary background to the reader for them to appreciate the importance, the novelty, and the impact your work will have. From there on, you're ready to write your discussion, discussing all the different results in a way that ensures a smooth flow of the different concepts and helping the reader have as good a grasp as possible of all the different take-home messages, and in a way that the text leads to the final conclusions. And this is where, at the very end, you present your key points, your conclusions, any thoughts on future steps that need to be taken, your opinion on the impact this work is anticipated to have, etc. In the discussion, it's common to also include a section on the strengths and limitations of the work described in a manuscript. And at the very end, surprisingly or not, is where you choose your title and you prepare your abstract. And the reason why we do this usually at the end is so that we have a full picture, comprehensive, complete picture of the manuscript, and then we choose the title that is just right for the text that we have put together. And the same goes for the abstract. Important, be careful not to repeat information across the different sections. What's gone in the introduction should not go into the discussion. And what's gone into the discussion or the introduction or the conclusion should not be identical with what's going to go in the abstract. Tip number 2, assigning authorships and contributorships. This is a very delicate and important chapter of my manuscript preparation, because you want to be fair, you want to be just, you want to include everyone who deserves an authorship, but at the same time ensure that everyone who's included has actually contributed substantial amount of work and type of work. So who should be an author on a manuscript? All scientists who've made significant contributions either to the conception or design of the research idea, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data. Those individuals should have also contributed in drafting the work or revising it critically. They must have also given their final consent, and they must agree to be accountable for all the aspects of the work presented. It is important to remember that all authors share responsibility and accountability for the published content. So it's important that they have contributed at the levels indicated, that they have a good understanding of the entire work that's been performed, and they give their consent to the final draft, the final version of the manuscript, and they agree to be accountable. Now, the ICMGE criteria, if we were to break things down into a little more detail, what do we mean by substantial contribution? This is intellectual contribution without which this work or this manuscript could not be completed. It wouldn't have been completed, it wouldn't have been written, it wouldn't have been possible to submit it for publication. And this may include actively supervising and managing scientific or medical content, developing the actual protocols used in the method section, performing the statistical analysis or interpretation of data, drafting the discussion in a coherent manner. Now, according to the ICMGE criteria, very important is also to have a contribution in the drafting and revising of the manuscript, and this includes revisions beyond language, grammar, and style and structure. So their contribution at this level must be a lot more profound. It must include substantial comments that have to do with perhaps the way the data are discussed, the way they're interpreted, the way they compare to other published work, etc. But it must include substantial contribution, critical comments, critical thinking, and not just stylistic or grammar changes. For someone to be an author, they also need to give their final approval. And this must be done only after they have carefully read the entire manuscript. And this means the entire text, the figures, the figure legends, the supplementary material. They must have a good understanding and a comprehensive view of this work in order to give their approval. It's extremely important, if you see it from the other way around, extremely important that all work is shared with all authors prior to submission. This is the only way they can give their approval and actually agree to be accountable for this work. And talking about accountability, this means that every author must feel confident about the work that's being published and the integrity of the co-authors. Each author must be able to independently identify the sections of the other co-authors, which means that they have a good understanding of what each other author has contributed. Now, who is not an author? According again to the ICMGE guidelines, individuals whose sole contribution has been in the form of technical support, administrative support, general support for the department, writing assistance in the form that we discussed earlier, so style, grammar, typos, etc. Or those individuals who've completed financially or by providing materials. These individuals should be acknowledged, but not as an author. And this brings us to contributorship. Contributing to research is usually broadly classified into the following three categories. So this, in a way, categorizes the different types of contribution we saw in the previous slide, where individuals cannot be placed in the author list, but they may have contributed financially, intellectually, or practically in all sorts of different ways. In these cases, they are acknowledged in the acknowledgement section of the manuscript, where we can clearly indicate that they have contributed and indicate how they have contributed in the specific work or in the specific manuscript. So unless an individual meets the 4 ICMGE criteria that we discussed in the previous slides, they do not merit inclusion as an author. Tip number 3, understanding copyright and licensing. And although this is a huge, big chapter in itself, it's a whole field actually in itself, there are some key pieces of information that it's important for all of us to bear in mind. Now, when it comes to copyrights, what are copyrights? They're the legal exclusive rights given to the creator of an idea or work to reproduce, reuse, modify, and share their work. In the subscription-based models of publication, these copyrights are transferred to the publisher. So a license cannot be added to a work without permission. In the case of open access models, copyrights mostly remain with the author. The authors can give licenses for reading, for copying, for reusing the content. And the authors need to take copyrights permission to use a third-party content in the manuscript while publishing in open access journals. So here you have a more flexible and author-centered type of copyrights. Now, there's 3 different types of licenses, and you see those marks. There's the copyrights, which is the C inside the circle. There's Creative Commons, 2 C's inside a circle, and then public domain, where you have the C actually crossed out. Let's look at a brief definition for each one of them so that you understand those signs when you come across them. When we talk about copyrights, it's the exclusive legal right given to the creator or copyright holder to use a work and authorize others to copy, distribute, perform, display, and create derivatives. Now, the Creative Commons is a set of licenses that give public permission to use and share creative work based on the creator's stated conditions. So here the creator has indicated specific conditions under which they will give public permission to use parts of their work. And then we have public domain, a status given to works that were never or are no longer protected by copyrights, such as government publications or works with expired copyright, in which case one does not need a license to use that material. They can go ahead and use it. So keep these in mind, both when it comes to the copyrights of your work, but also copyrights of work that you may want to use to include in your publication. The 2 different sides of the coin, if you wish. Now, tip number 4, make sure that you disclose any conflict of interest. This is very important, and sometimes it can escape our attention. Now, by conflict of interest, we mean any financial or other ties of any of the authors to organizations or individuals that may lead to bias in the presented work. Any such conflicts of interest need to be disclosed, and we need to think carefully because we may assume that there was no conflict of interest, that we were not influenced, but in practice, it's important to disclose any such ties that may be present. So conflicts of interest could be associated with the host organization of the authors or other organizations. For example, if some of the authors participate in boards of directors, if they serve as expert consultants in companies, if they're major shareholders in other companies specializing in related fields, any of that needs to be disclosed. If they have received fees for services they provided, for example, to companies, anything that could be considered as influencing their judgment needs to be disclosed. So in those cases, all those cases, we include a disclosure statement under the manuscript section that's called conflict of interest, and most publications specifically spell out that they need this section. But even if it's not spelled out, if there is a conflict of interest, you absolutely must declare it. And in those instances, it's best if you indicate it also in the cover letter to the editor that you will be submitting together with your manuscript. Now, potential conflicts of interest, in order to elaborate a little more on this, because sometimes we just don't think of something as a conflict of interest when it is. Conflict of interest could have to do with consultancy, so serving as a consultant in different organizations. It could have to do with who is your employer for your full-time position or your part-time position, with involvement in advocacy groups, grants that you have received depending who the funding body was, fees and honoraria that you may have received for the specific type of work that's published in this manuscript, or in the recent years as a whole. And you need to be careful not to forget including any such conflicts of interest. Any patents that you may have, or royalties that you may be receiving, any stocks or shares that you own in companies that are associated with a specific field where you will be publishing. So try to keep an open mind and be careful about declaring any conflict of interest yourself or your co-authors. Make sure if you are the one putting the manuscript together, if you are the corresponding or the senior author, make sure that you remind them to disclose any conflict of interest, and make sure that they are all clear as to what should be stated there. Now, tip number 5, steer clear from publication misconduct. This is a very, very important chapter in one's career, not only in academic publishing. There's many different types of misconduct: research misconduct and publication misconduct. But zooming into publication misconduct, top 3 most frequently encountered cases of misconduct is the fabrication of data and results, when you make up something that was never there; falsification of data, when you manipulate your research data, your images, your numbers, etc., so that you present what you would have liked to see there rather than what the reality is; and 3, plagiarism, when you use someone else's research, processes, results, or words without giving due credit. All these 3 are heavily penalized. They're unacceptable in the research world, and you need to be extremely careful not to do them, not falling into this trap accidentally, and ensuring that none of your collaborators or team members accidentally fall into those traps. Other types of publication misconduct, equally serious, is the citation manipulation, copyright infringement, misallocation of credit when it comes to authorship and acknowledgements, non-disclosing your conflicts of interest, dual submission, dual publication, or salami slicing, where you actually take a piece of work and you chop it up in smaller pieces, so from one piece of work you can actually get many publications out. Now, all this is not viewed favorably, is heavily criticized, and it can seriously damage your career, especially in the case of the 3 top types of publication misconduct I showed you in the previous slide. They can completely ruin one's career once detected, and they are detected sooner or later. Especially plagiarism is very easy to detect nowadays. Manuscripts don't go through the initial filtering process if there is plagiarism detected. Or if it does go through, they will end up being retracted later on. And unfortunately, there are several such cases out there. So be very careful to remember those rules and more importantly, not to fall into traps that may lead you down those avenues. Golden rules to remember: honesty, scrutiny, respect for intellectual property, and avoiding bias. So do not fabricate, falsify, don't try to beautify your data. Don't let yourself fall into the trap of a very subjective interpretation of your findings. We need to be objective. We need to discover the truth, not prove that our initial hypothesis was right. Scrutiny to avoid human errors as much as possible, and avoid negligence as much as possible. Use standard operating procedures in your lab. Try to ensure that SOP, standard operating procedures, are in place in your network of collaborators. Double check each other's data, go back and forth, and use constructive criticism to interpret everything. Respect intellectual property by giving the due credit where is due, and avoid bias when it comes to interpreting and discussing and presenting your conclusions and hypotheses. Now, as your manuscript is coming into shape, you need to choose the right journal, the right home for your work. And there's thousands of different scientific journals out there, and choosing the right one, especially in the earlier years of one's career, is not an easy task. However, if one does not take the time to choose the right journal and they end up going for the wrong journal for their work, this will lead to unnecessary delay in their publication because their manuscript will likely get rejected. It will have to be resubmitted, reformatted. It may go unavoidably through many cycles of rejection and resubmission, and then one ends up running into the risk of actually being scooped because of all the time that they've wasted trying to find the right home. So it's important to spend the time to think right from the beginning all the different parameters that would make a journal the right home for your work. So what is it that makes a journal right for your work? First of all, look at the aims, the scope of the journal. How well are they aligned with the aims of and the focus of your work? Would that journal be interested in that field that you're working on, in the type of data that you have generated, in the conclusions that you've reached? Then look into acceptability and discoverability. Check PubMed, check IE Explore, CiteSeer, Crossref, check Scopus. How easy will it be for people to find your manuscript if you've published it in that specific journal? Is it the first place they would look for that type of information? Will they easily come across it? So is it listed in PubMed? Is it listed in Scopus, etc.? Look at the quality of the journals that you have in mind. Who are the editors there? Who are the reviewers? What's the track record? What's the impact factor? What's the history of the journal? Who's the publisher? How is their website structured? How fast is the reviewing process and the publication process? You can see all those metrics. And you see how each one of those steps in the diagram presented in this slide is enabling you to shorten and shorten and shorten further the list of eligible journals, of journals that would be a good home for your work. How fast you need to get your publication out, and how would each one of the shortlisted journals help you achieve this goal. Then what's the publication model? Are these open access style journals, or are they subscription? And how would this affect the visibility and the accessibility of your manuscript? Do you have a budget to cover these fees or not? All this comes into the equation. And then you have selection tools that can help you choose the right journal based on the different criteria that you want to set in place. And some examples are present in the brackets you see here, like Think, Check, Submit, Find My Journal, etc. One key point that I would like to emphasize is this of avoiding predatory journals. Many of us, highly likely you as well, are bombarded with invitations from journals that we've never heard of, journals that may not even have a website or have um, they don't have an impact factor. They're not transparent about publishers' identity and location. They boast about fake impact factors. They falsely claim to be indexed in PubMed. They tend to send a lot of spam mail. They promise acceptance within a few days. They lack an editor-in-chief, and they have a website, often have a website that's riddled with grammarly errors and broken links. And then in many instances, you will find that the articles that are published there, they're not even professionally typeset. So there's all different types of hints that you can pick up if you're on the lookout for predatory journals. Avoid them at all costs, because this will not be uh, the right avenue to reach the audiences, the academic audiences that you want to reach, and it will make your work viewed negatively rather than promote your work to the right audience. Now, there's many predatory journals out there. Sometimes their um, uh, spam emailing approach can be very aggressive, but always check carefully where the invitations you receive come from and what the journals that you come across really are. Check all their different parameters before you decide. Now, tip number 7. If you want to uh, aim to a journal that you haven't published before, maybe a very high impact journal, and you're uncertain as to whether your work will find a good home there, whether it will be well received, whether it's within the scope of that journal, writing a pre-submission inquiry is the right way to go. Now, the advantages of following this approach, so of actually writing a letter to ask the editor or the associate editor if the manuscript that you're preparing or you have ready would be considered and sent to reviewers if it falls within the scope of that journal. Now, the advantage of that is that it enables the editor and maybe the associate editors to assess if this is a good fit. So if they give you the green light, you will know that it will be considered for sending to reviewers. By no means this means that your article will be accepted, but it means that it falls within the scope and it will likely be sent to reviewers if the quality is considered good enough. Second advantage is that it saves you time from going through the whole process of formatting your manuscript, going through the submission process, waiting for the editors to assess the manuscript, and then get back to you as to whether they reject it right at that stage or send it to reviewers. So you save time and you know right from the beginning if you're heading the right direction. Now, some of the disadvantages is that the editor's response, of course, does not guarantee consideration for peer review, does not guarantee acceptance in any case, because in the full length submissions where they will be able to assess the full content, the quality, etc. But it's a good first step. The other disadvantage is that many journals do not encourage or do not accept such inquiries. So check the journal's website first before contacting the editor, just to make sure that they are okay with receiving such pre-submission inquiries. Tip number 8, ensuring adherence to the author guidelines. Every journal has their own guidelines, and these are clearly presented in their websites. So in general, in the guide for authors that you will find, there will be details about the submission procedures for the specific journal, information and fees for publishing open access, copyright and ethical guidelines. And when you go through this process for every journal separately, you need to be very careful as to what they consider essential, mandatory, required, or necessary. Make sure that anything that falls into those categories is taken into consideration by you and your team when you prepare the manuscript, when you prepare the material to be submitted. For example, some examples would be some journals require a graphical abstract, and you do not want to submit your manuscript and then have the journal team come back and ask you for the graphical abstract and waste time to prepare it and resubmit it and go through all these circles of unnecessary communication if you can prepare everything right from the beginning. In some cases, if something really major is missing, you could end up having a rejection and the encouragement to go back to correct it, or a rejection full stop. So make sure that you follow all the guidelines carefully. Always ensure that you conform to these guidelines. Ask for consent from all the authors and concerned parties before submitting. Ensure adherence to all instructors right from the first manuscript draft. If you have decided on the journal that you will submitting to, it's much better to prepare right from the start in the right format, all the different sections in the right structure, etc. It will save you a lot of time. Use the author tools provided by the journal. Sometimes they provide you the template for the manuscript, and you just need to fill in the different sections in that template. Sometimes they provide checklists that you need to tick as you prepare the different pieces of material that will be submitted. They have information on references and how they want them formatted. So make sure that you use the tools that are available. They're there to help you and to help them. And this will make everything go much smoother and much faster. When you go over their website, the journal's website, look for headings such as for authors, submit your article, author resources, and take the time to look into these different sections and make sure that you're fully aware of what they have to offer to you and what they require from you as you prepare your manuscript. Tip number 9, understanding the submission requirements. And these differ from journal to journal. So right before manuscript submission, double check everything that you've written in your manuscript. Double check the results, the figures, the tables, the statistics, ensure consistency, check the details. Make sure everything is prepared not only in the highest scientific quality, but also in an aesthetically pleasing fashion. And make sure that the information is consistent throughout, because sometimes when we revise manuscripts and revise tables and figures and the text, sometimes the numbers change. They need to change everywhere. This is a very, for example, common error that editors and editorial boards come across. So do double check everything, and if possible, have another one of the authors double check everything with you, or all the authors double check everything with you if possible. Make sure you acknowledge and cite all sources that have been used. Make sure you've structured the manuscript in the specific journal's format. it always gives a bad impression to the editor when a manuscript is submitted, no matter how good it is, if it has been formatted for a different journal. It gives the impression that this journal was the second or third or fourth best. It doesn't look good. In a way, it shows lack of respect for the specific journal you're submitting to. So make sure you format it right. And a few more points to check right before submission. Ensure the language is as perfect as possible. Manuscripts should be edited by native speakers or individuals who are highly fluent in that language. Ensure that you provide the accurate author information and contact details. Ensure that all conflicts of interest have been disclosed. There's compliance with the ethical guidelines, and you have a persuasive cover letter to accompany your manuscript. Now, how should one structure this cover letter? A classical format would be the one that you're seeing on your slide now. So you start with the date of submission, the editor's name, the title, their title, the journal's name, and then you start by providing the name, the title of your manuscript, and you express how you, in a very polite fashion, you would be grateful if the specific manuscript, which is submitted as original research, review, meta-analysis, you state the type of article, is considered for peer review in the specific journal, and you provide the journal's name. Then you go on to include a paragraph with very few sentences, but impactful sentences. What was the gap in that field that you tried to fill? How did you approach the specific scientific question? What are your key findings and why you believe these findings are important and relevant to this journal? Why do you think that the readers of this journal will benefit from having access to your work, to your data, to your manuscript? Then you state that if there are any conflicts of interest, that this manuscript has not been submitted as it shouldn't have been submitted anywhere else for publication, is not under consideration by another journal. And you close in a very polite fashion. Once now you have your cover letter ready, you start compiling the folder with all the different files that you will need to submit. So this will include, and it's good to have a checklist to ensure you don't forget anything, or the journal may have a checklist for you. You want to include your main text, your figures, your tables, your supplementary material. It's always helpful if you annotate each one of those files with file names that are very clear as to what the content is, so you don't mix them up when you upload them. The manuscripts should be in the preferred format of the journal, be it Word or LaTeX or PDF. Any equations in MathML and MathType format. All figures, schemes, and tables should have their appropriate titles and legends. Don't forget that. Make sure the numbering is correct. Make sure all figures, all tables are cited in the manuscript. Don't forget to cite any of them. And they need to be in numerical order, the order of appearance. Again, make sure that everything's formatted as per journal's requirements, and the types of files are exactly as the journal requires. So do they want their figures as PowerPoint, as TIFF, as JPEGs, as PNG, PDF? Whatever they want, this is how you should format it. Ensure the resolution is high enough, the size of everything is appropriate, so that when it goes to print, what you want to show is actually showing, and it doesn't disappear because it gets shrunk or because it gets pixelized or because the resolution is too low. Very important to have all this sorted out right from the beginning, because the reviewers will need to see as perfect as possible a figure and a table and the manuscript. You don't want to create problems at that level, or even worse, when it reaches the readers. Now, other data, remember to have available, again, depending on what the journal wants you to upload. If they want you to upload a checklist, make sure that you have your acknowledgements there in place, your conflicts of interest, funding information, very important, any IRB approvals, the raw data, because even this needs to be submitted in some types of work and in certain journals, any informed consent that you have used in the course of your work, and of course, all author information and authorship criteria. So all these perhaps details need to be in place to ensure a smooth journey for your manuscript during the submission process. And this brings us to the actual submission. Tip number 10, familiarize yourself with the online manuscript submission process. Now, the online submission systems are actually the electronic submission systems, which have pretty much become an integral part of the publishing process. This is how we all submit our manuscripts nowadays. They provide step-by-step guidelines how to use each online system. So each system will have a step-by-step layout usually, and they're self-evident, and they do have guides and advice how to go about it. For every online system, you access it with a personalized login. So you create your login information, and you're the only one who can view your profile. This is unique. So you know that what you've uploaded is your work. You've uploaded it, you know what's there. Nobody else can tamper with it in the process. The online submission systems serve multiple purposes. For one, they are an easy way for us to submit our work, but also an easy way for the publisher to receive all those different items in an organized fashion so as to expedite the process. Some of the well-known online submission systems include the Editorial Manager, the ACS Paragon Plus environment, manuscript tracking system used by Nature, the AAAS submission and information portal that's used by Science, and so on and so forth. Now, these systems, as I mentioned, serve multiple roles. First of all, they are very easy for passing the article and the reviewer information to Cascade partners if needed. They have incorporated anti-plagiarism software to check every manuscript that's submitted. They help manage the licensing processes. They request ORCID, so researchers, the unique researchers' IDs. So they offer an easy way to connect the information of every submitted work to all other works of each of the authors, each scientist, and therefore they help them get credit for the work they have performed, and they help people identify who the authors actually are in the science world. These online submission systems also are valuable for exchanging information with Crossref, with PubMed, and other indexing systems. So your manuscript, once accepted, can be easily and fast indexed. So you see how online submission systems really serve everyone's best interest and facilitate the process. And that's why it's important have your login all set up, familiarize yourself with them. And for some scientists, the friendliness of the online submission system a journal uses sometimes falls under the criteria for selecting a journal to submit to. So, wrapping up this presentation, to summarize our key points, first of all, ensure the high quality of your work. Choose your references carefully. Choose the content of your manuscript carefully. Avoid any research and publication misconduct. Choose your journal carefully, a good home for your specific type of work, avoiding any predatory journals. Make sure you follow the journal guidelines, that you're fully aware of them, you understand them, and carefully follow them. And then draft an exceptional cover letter to go together with your submission. With that, we reach the end of our presentation. I'd like to thank you all for your attention and wish you good luck with your future publications. This is a disclaimer, and I'm here to discuss any questions that you may have. Just to remind you, feel free to use the Q&A box that's available in the platform, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Okay, we have a question. If there's any advice on using historic documents, um, I presume you mean as to whether they should be cited, um, or I don't know if you would like to make your question more specific. But any sources that you've used should be cited in your manuscript, both inside appropriately cited inside the text, as well as at the bibliography at the end. Now, if your question has to do more with how to use that information, whether you want to paraphrase it substantially or to express it in your own words or use quotes to refer to a historical text, you can choose between quotes and expressing it in your own words, but in all instances, you have to provide the citation. I don't know if that answers your question though. So if you want to make it more specific, I'll be more than happy to discuss further. Okay, well, if there are, oh, great. Yes, yes, thank you. Um, yes, Brian. Avoiding plagiarism on old reports but giving citations. Yes, if you want to copy a text exactly as it was stated in any other document, historical or not, you can use the quotation marks and the citation. If you don't need to copy the text as such, then you express it in your own words and always provide the citation. So, yes. Okay, I don't see any further questions. My pleasure. So I think this brings us to the end of our session. Thank you for joining us today, and I wish you a lovely afternoon and look forward to interacting with you in a future webinar. Thank you. All the best.